Today's episode is sponsored by newspapers.com, the largest online newspaper archive. Newspapers.com makes it easy to find your family's story with more than 500 million digitized newspaper pages from the 1690s to today. Search for obituaries, marriage and birth announcements, photos, and more in papers from across the U.S., the UK, Canada, and beyond, stretching back 3 centuries. For listeners of this podcast, newspapers.com is offering 20% off a Publisher Extra subscription. Just use the code Genealogy Adventure at checkout. That code is Genealogy Adventure for 20% off Publisher Extra.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Genealogy Adventures. I'm Brian Sheffy.
And I'm Donya Williams. How are you guys doing today?
We both hope that you guys are having an awesome Sunday, and thank you as always for sharing the next hour with us. And
Yes.
Donya, did you know that today was National Parents Day?
Oh, thank you. Happy Parents' Day to me. Happy Parents' Day to everybody.
Happy Parents' Day to everyone. And as well as anything else, we hope that you guys are staying cool, because obviously we're in the midst of a heat wave, a historic one.
This heat is real. It's not a game.
So we have quite the show lined up for you today. I've seen, a lot of excitement already online with a lot of chatter about the subject. So without further ado, I am going to introduce our guest. So Cynthia Wilson began researching once she retired from the Boeing Company as an executive assistant. She has several publications in well-known and prominent journals and other media such as the African American Historical and Genealogical Society Journal, blackpast.org, and Pacific Northwest newspapers, including the Seattle Post-Intelligencer and the Issaquah Press. And today she's joining us to talk about the men who served with the USCT, who ended up going to the Pacific Northwest. And it's something that Donnie and I know very little about, and judging by people who've been chattering online, you're finding this absolutely fascinating too. So Cynthia, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
But we're just so excited to have you.
I'm real excited to hear all of this, because I never knew that the U.S. I always wondered, like, where did all of the soldiers come from? And I know from our research on our own, we've always seen them from the South, a little bit from the North, but not any from the Northwest. So I'm very, I really want to know more about this.
Mm-hmm. But we're going to start at the very beginning, because you are also a genealogist, and Donnie and I thought you'd like to kind of chat about that with our audience. How did you get involved in genealogy? What was it about it that just kind of grabbed you and kind of sucked you in?
I took a photography class at Seattle Art Institute, and a coworker of mine said, "Well, you got this degree. Why don't you do your family history?" And I said, "Well, I can't do that because I don't know it." So I got in touch with a cousin in West Virginia. She gave me 3 hints. She gave me the name of a woman, Rhoda, said she was from the West Indies. That wasn't correct. And that she was a slave. So I got 2 out of 3. I talked to my mother, and she knew one of Rhoda's children, Lot. And then somebody suggested I talk to Jackie Lawson, who founded the Black Genealogy Research Group. So I joined them in '93, got a whole lot of tips, and off I went. So I've been doing it ever since.
And it sounds like you grappled with what we all grapple with, that those oral family stories. Sometimes there's kernel of truths in there, but sometimes you kind of end up chasing your tail. But at least you had 2 out of the 3. So you may not
Right.
have had a perfect score, but you had 2 out of 3, so that was good.
And I knew the county in Virginia where they were living at the time, so I did pretty good. I didn't do what they tell you to do, is start from now and work backwards. I started backwards and worked forward. So I went straight to 1870 and found my uh, second great grandmother in the county with her children.
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting, because so that means that you kind of knew who certain people were from the beginning,
right?
In order for you to do that. Yeah, I would have never been able to do that.
And someone told me females are the hardest to trace. Well, all my women were the easiest ones to trace, and Lucy, the name Lucy, was in every other generation.
Wow.
Interesting. So
That's interesting.
I'm just curious, just really quick before you go on to the soldiers. What was it that actually made that group of female ancestors easier to research than the men? Because you are right. Normally we hear it the other way, that they are really difficult.
I only saw one man, and that's it. The females were giving me all the clues I needed.
Wow.
That is awesome.
So I
go ahead.
No, go ahead. I got back to 1741 on the female side.
What?
Yes.
What? Wow. So, okay. Well, where were the men?
They were there, but it was easier to attract a female.
That's amazing.
That is amazing. That might actually be the subject. That might be the subject of another show.
I swear, because I have never that is amazing.
Well, actually, my father's mother's side, the maternal line, they were very easy. It was the Edgefield ones, and because there was more than one woman who was born around the same time with the same name, because they're all the same family.
And then I had the Lucy every other generation that helped out too.
I guess I don't know. It's not it. My research ain't easy.
It took me 10 years.
My research is not easy. So trying to find, I have a problem trying to find the men in my family. Matter of fact, let me just be real. I have a problem trying to find whole families because they up and disappear after 2 census records. Like
check on the spelling of the first names.
Oh no, I've done all of that. Trust me when I tell you, it is.
Oh no, because I know the family that Donnie is talking about, and if these people should have actually written the guidebook for going into the witness protection program. Because when they did, and it's like a genetic thing with the family. When they don't want to be found, you can't find them.
No, you can't find them.
You
literally have to wait.
I had that with one of my soldiers. I couldn't find him, and then I started looking for his children, and I found them in New Orleans.
Wow. Yeah, I would see, like I said, with this particular family, even the kids disappear. Like everybody. The entire family will just, it could be a family of 5, and all 5 of them just poof, like they never existed.
Well, you got it.
And we know that because we get their descendants as DNA matches. And even they don't know.
And they're like, I don't know.
But that's not the subject of today's show. Although this has been a wonderful conversation. Like I said, we may very well have you come back because we don't really talk about female-specific research as much as we should do. So I guess it's a bit of a leap and a jump to go from doing your own genealogy to then researching the history and the stories of these men. who were stationed in the Pacific Northwest. What was it about their story that kind of really captured your imagination and got you actively researching them?
Well, I started the Black Genealogy Research Group was having a seminar in 2004, along with the Church of Latter-day Saints. So we were looking for a hook, and we decided, I had seen a newspaper article about the Grand Army of the Republic Cemetery here was getting cleaned up. And they had 3 Black soldiers, and the only 3 Black soldiers in that cemetery. So we decided to research those soldiers. So I picked one, Guilford Hervey, and I got on an airplane. I went back to DC, where I'm originally from. Spent my time in the archives, and came home with 3 pounds of paper.
Mm.
So one of the members of the LDS Church called the newspaper, and myself and Jackie Lawson were interviewed about those guys in the cemetery. When he started talking to Jackie about Guilford Hervey, it sort of clicked, because she and her ancestors were owned by the same family that Guilford Hervey was owned by. So we did a newspaper article, had it as part of the seminar, and I got hooked, and I started researching the other 2. Then I decided, well, by that time, I've been doing this for 19 years. So early on, I was going to only do those in Seattle. Didn't have enough guys, so I decided to do the entire state of Washington. Now, that's an elephant to be chewed on.
Mm.
So I use Ancestry, I use FamilySearch.org, I use newspapers, I use the census records, especially those for the 1890 census, because Washington State wasn't damaged. So I went through all the counties line by line and was picking out all these guys that I could find, and then started doing research. And I have friends who are historians, and when they run across one, they send it my way.
Mm-hmm.
But I also ordered their pension records, because their pension records are loaded with lots of stuff. I think the article I sent you was about Clark Harris.
Yes.
And his foibles with the things he was doing with his 2 wives. That left his second wife pregnant and penniless.
Yeah.
So one thing that I'd like to pick up, so this is going to be a 2-part question, and the first part's kind of the simpler part. So presumably, because these men had been fighting in the army, was it the army who transferred them from wherever they had finished their service to the Pacific Northwest?
No, they did that on their own.
Oh, okay.
They came by train. I don't know. I only know that they came by train. Most of them came by train.
So what compelled them to, because we're going to talk in a little bit about kind of the length and breadth of the country they were coming from. Who organized it, and what was the need that they felt to go to the Pacific Northwest?
Well, most of them wanted a better life. The Homestead Act of 1862 was in place, so the guys could get land, 160 acres of land. Coal mine, we had a strike in the coal mines, so Big Jim Shepherdson went east, got a lot of guys from Illinois and Missouri, got them on the train and sent them here to work the mines. Some of them stayed. Some of them got wind of the strike and got off in Yakima and stayed in Yakima and became farmers.
Wow.
And what was the kind of local reception when these men began to arrive?
The newspapers welcomed them, encouraged them to come and stay. I didn't find anything unwelcoming from the state because they were getting labor, they were getting farmers, they were getting barbers, ministers. So there was no uproar that I found in the newspapers about those guys showing up.
Okay. So basically the men that were arriving there with skills or trades or something that
Yes.
was beneficial to the local community.
Yes.
Oh, cool. So did they kind of organize themselves as a regiment, or did their history really remain kind of civilian life?
After they got here,
Mm-hmm.
It was civilian life. Except I had about three of them who did join the Buffalo Soldiers, and then after they did their duty there, they came to the state of Washington.
Cool. Did any of them come with family members, like wives or children, or were they mostly single men?
I wish I had my statistics with me. They were mostly men with children and wives.
Oh wow! So how was that trek for them? That that migration from the East Coast to the West Coast.
Some of them waited till they got here and then sent for their wives and children.
Ah.
The ones who came with the coal miners were frightened because of what was going on in the mines, but they had lodgings for them. There were, guards who were protecting the families. And there were a lot of single men who showed up here and got married.
Wow.
And while we were still in the green room, you were telling us a little bit about where these men were coming from or where they were bringing their families from. Can you just tell our audience kind of roughly where in the states they were leaving behind to come to the Northwest?
Now there were some free men of color who came from Connecticut, Philadelphia, New Jersey. And then the other guys were here from Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Florida, Georgia, Alabama, Missouri, Mississippi, New Orleans, Louisiana.
So really just kind of the length, and I'm not hearing too much in terms of like Ohio and like the Midwest. But would you suggest to audience members that and I guess roughly what time period do you start seeing them make that migration westwards?
Most of them wound up here between 1880 and 1900, although I had one guy who showed up in 1869, so he was the earliest one that showed up.
Wow, that was early.
Yeah, so you got about 20 years. You got about 20 years of migration for my set of gentlemen. I think I had one or two that showed up one showed up in 1904. And he had come from Pennsylvania.
Mm-hmm. So I'm not thinking of the Yeldells, Donnie, as I'm getting ready to say this, but I guess what I would suggest to the audience members is, around that 1870 census, between 1870 and 1880, if all of a sudden you're missing family members and you legitimately cannot find them anywhere in that county or state, it may be worth looking at places like Washington State, see if they were there.
That's true. And you could be talking about Yodels. You know how they go.
That's true. They popped up. They went to the Midwest, and we didn't expect that.
We
So
wasn't expecting that. So they
So,
pop
so,
up everywhere.
so if you're looking for some in the 1900s, and you suspect that they migrated west, and they may have shown up, say, in Ohio or Iowa, check the births of the children, where they were born.
mm,
That'll kind of get you backtracking, so you can look for what do I want to say, city directories that might have names in them. And if you're coming here, um, when you get here, you're still looking at the children's birth, so you see how they migrated from where they started after the soldier got out until they got here.
mm. And paired with that recommendation, also familiarizing yourself with the migration routes from east to west.
Right.
Because I mentioned that even in that period, well, I mean, the Pacific Northwest is still a fairly forested, very, mountainous, rural area. I imagine it was even more so back in the time period that we're talking about. So I can imagine there weren't that many roads, there weren't that many railroad lines. So just thinking in terms of narrowing people's focus in terms of research to kind of retrofit where their ancestors may have come from.
Well, the one line that went to Washington State runs alongside I-90, which goes all the way across the country. So that was a main route to take.
So that line was doing that even after the Civil War?
Yeah.
When was that line built? Do you know?
I have no idea.
Okay.
But it was
go ahead.
It was a major thoroughfare for anybody coming this way.
Wow. So what is there like one particular soldier or one of the soldiers that you found a very interesting story when you started talking about them or researching them?
A recent one would be Henry Carper. He was out of Virginia. He was a slave, and when he came out, he he claimed he sold a pair of pants for $2 and got himself something to eat, and then he walked the rest of the way to his destination. He got there and started saving his money up and started buying property and became wealthy. Then he and his wife moved to Philadelphia and started the same thing. He was saving his money and he was buying property. When he left, he sold all his property, came to Seattle about 1903, 1904, and started doing the same thing here in Seattle. So he bought several properties along a major thoroughfare, I-5, that was going through the middle of the city. And he sold all that and became very wealthy and very wise. He was a moral man, I put it. And he had three children, one by his first wife and two by his second. And when he died, he left his wife filthy rich.
She said filthy rich. So okay, wait a minute. So okay, how did he come across the money to then purchase
working
all of the working way? I mean, like give us some details on him. Like what? Because
okay, so he was a head waiter at a hotel.
Okay.
He worked himself up to be a head waiter at a hotel. Then he was a head waiter at another hotel. And the man was just like a penny pincher. He was just saving his money. And then, he was buying property. I mean,
Wow.
the property there at that time, I mean, you buy a house for $125.
Yeah, that was life back then.
Although to be fair, that was still a sum of money
Yes.
Yes.
for people back in the day.
And he held on his money. His two sons kept themselves in trouble. To the point, both of them were in jail, and he let them stay in jail. He didn't bail them out. So he was holding on to his money. Just recently, I was introduced to his great grandnephew. We met at the cemetery, and the other researcher. There were two of us researching the gentleman. I was more of the newspaper type. I've got a binder full of newspaper articles about him and his family.
Wow.
Now the other person that I found interesting, got on the train, was headed to Seattle, got off at Yakima, bought a hops, the hops that go in the beer, bought a hops ranch, and became the wealthiest Black man in Yakima. He had built a house, a 2-story house that was huge. And unfortunately, he lost his money because of a crooked bank employee. So.
And that was back before the days of federal deposit protections. Now that's a really sad story. These towns these towns and cities where they were living. I'm thinking about where I grew up in Connecticut. Occasionally you would see like a plaque about an African American person who lived in the town or had a business or gives information. Were any of these men's lives kind of do they have plaques or is there anything in these towns to kind of say that these men lived there?
Mostly the barbers had the plaques, like in a hotel. Carper had a saloon that was advertised in a city directory. The ministers, one of them, Peter Barrow, had the first Black church in Spokane, Washington. And it was on the main thoroughfare. And he was a minister there for maybe 6 years. He was also part of the Warren County, Mississippi legislature. He was in the Senate, and then he was in the House of Representatives, and then he was in the Senate. But basically, it was the barbers and the ministers that kept their identity known.
And I'm curious, are their descendants still kind of found, or some of their descendants still found in the places where they had moved to?
When they moved here,
mm-hmm.
The Donaldsons have the biggest number of descendants living here in the state. And I've been working with a 5th grade grandson of Jesse Donaldson. They're working on a book that's coming out in 2 years. Otherwise, Clark Harris has descendants in Oregon and California. The one Black Confederate has some family here, but not a whole lot.
Okay, hold on. You just threw a curveball. What you mean Black Confederate? Who is that?
His name was George Rawls. His owner took him into the army as a servant. But somehow or another, they hired him on as a soldier. And I have a record that says he was a soldier in the Black Confederacy.
Let me tell you how you might just like blow the minds of so many people just from that alone, and then just lift up people like Kevin Levin, because he's been telling folks that blacks were Confederate soldiers.
Yes, they were.
No, he didn't. He argued he said that they were.
Oh, I thought he did.
No. The book that he wrote was kind of how Cynthia started, by saying that they were body servants, that they were digging the ditches, doing the cooking, that they were not soldiers.
Oh, so she would be blowing Kevin's mind.
But just one name. You can't rewrite. I'm sure that there may have been others, but now we know of at least one person.
Someone wrote a book about Black Confederates, Black men in the Confederate Army, and the book is maybe 2 inches thick, with listing of all the African Americans that were in the Confederate armies, and it confirmed the fact that George Rawls was a private in the Mississippi 7th Army, along with his owner, Benjamin Rawls. So I'm not home, so I can't pull the book off the shelf.
That's okay. Wow. Okay. We need to get her and Kevin just so they can see, because I'm sure Kevin would want to know more about that.
No, I'm sure he would.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Because remember, what he documented in his book is going through the National Archives, and he was pulling their pension papers and their Confederate pension papers, and he was looking at when they were applying for their pensions within their states, how many of them didn't get the pension from the Confederates from their state as Confederates because they weren't soldiers. So if there's actually a card for Mr. Rawls that says that he was a private with a gun shooting at Union people, I'm sure that Kevin would find that very interesting. I'm sure that Kevin would find that very, very interesting.
The only thing is, some of the Black soldiers could not get a pension until after 1924, and by that time, most of them were dead.
Or dead, yeah.
But the ones that did get it through on the Confederate side, they got it through the Confederate side.
Right. They had to apply for it in the state that they were living in.
Mm-hmm.
The southern state that they were living in.
Wow. Wow. I don't know about y'all, but I'm completely done.
It would be different than the ones in my own family that I know who were there in the Confederate side, but they were legit body servants. So right. They never held a gun. They dressed their Confederate officer, servicemen, cook, clean the guns, clean the clothes, but they never fought.
I don't think they were cleaning their guns.
Yeah, that's what I'm going to say. So they're not going to let them use the gun. Really? So they didn't let them use the gun, but they made them clean the gun.
Clean it. Yeah.
That's why I wasn't born during that time, because I swear somebody got shot. Somebody. That's crazy. So we definitely have some questions. You got a question first before I go to this one, Brian?
No, you can take the audience question.
Okay. So this is from Shelly Murphy. Shelly Murphy says, weren't the USCT signed up for three-year terms, and some of them were still active after the Civil War ended?
It depended on when they signed up. If you signed up in 64, you might have gotten to 3 years. But that was a term that was written in their pseudo contract that they would do 3 years. A lot of the guys did 2 years. Some did 1 year. Some did months. So the 3 years was what they were supposed to do.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And Shelley said there is a difference between being a soldier with a gun on a front line versus manservant, etc. So she also asked, were these soldiers on the front line? Like, was Rawls one of the people that was actually on the front line being that soldier doing that shooting?
No, he wasn't. He was,
so
even though he was a private, he was still in camp with duties for his owner.
So he never had a gun, actually.
I don't think he did have a gun. I think he was helpless on that part.
So I think that's where the argument comes in as to whether or not those soldiers were actually given, or those that they consider a soldier were actually given a weapon. But you're saying that for him, he was listed as a soldier.
Right.
So I guess what makes a man a soldier, or is the question, what makes them the soldier?
And it's not the gun, because you don't have the gun.
Shelley said, do as your master tells you.
Yes, indeed.
Oh, goodness.
No, I mean, Dawn, you just make a good point. That has always been the kind of contention about technically who was a soldier and who wasn't. As opposed to the Union Army, which eventually, under much persuasion, eventually did put guns in soldiers' hands and put them in the front line. So all I can speak to is for the ancestors of mine who did serve in the Confederacy, and I use the term serve loosely. It was as cooks, ditch diggers, looking after their enslaver, like I said, doing all those kind of tasks to kind of keep things ticking over, much like what they did in the American Revolution, type thing.
You know what? I don't think they brought their families with them either.
No, they probably couldn't, and wouldn't.
But I quickly want to cycle back to the Pacific Northwest again. If the men who did this move kind of left any written record, because again we've kind of shouted out different parts of the country that they came from. Going to the Pacific Northwest must have been something of a culture shock. I mean, it's the climate is different, the environment is different. I would imagine even like something as simple as a farming cycle, the cycle of growing crops would also be quite difficult. I mean, what kind of challenges, or I guess kind of what did they have to get used to compared to what they had left behind?
Well, the weather would be the biggest thing. Out here in Seattle, your weather sort of blends. There's no, it's winter, it's fall, it's spring. It all kind of blends in. We do get snow on occasion. So they had mild climates. It might get hot. I mean it's cool right now, but we're supposed to get 95 degrees toward the end of the week. But there's no humidity. So farming would have been perfect for those guys who came out here.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. And again, someone just mentioned, Randy just mentioned something about Native Americans. And again, depending on what part of the country these men were coming from, they may have had no experience with Native Americans, again, because they had already been cleared out in terms of, Jackson, President Jackson had cleared them out in places like Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, parts of Louisiana.
But not so much out here.
So I wondered what those relationships were like.
Yeah, that's what she made that comment. Yeah, because they were definitely Native Americans were deep in that area. Am I correct?
Mm-hmm.
Right, you are. But African Americans with woolly hair was sort of a thing that surprised the Native Americans about us.
That eternal fascination with our hair.
Can I touch it?
Yeah, what was the 19th century equivalent of that?
And then there was the skin color, because we were so brown when they got out here. So it's like, will it come off?
What?
Will the skin color come off? So.
Yeah, no, I heard that. And I'm also intrigued because, obviously West Coast, was a huge fishing and whaling industry and seals. They were hunting for seals. Was there any documentation that African Americans were engaged in this kind of occupations?
One of my guys was a whaler after he got out here. The whaling ship went up to the Arctic, got smashed. He survived.
Wow.
Came back down to Seattle. Became a fisherman. I had 2 fishermen in my group. They would come out of Seattle down to San Francisco and do the fishing from San Francisco to wherever they went. And then he'd come back to Seattle, and he worked in a hotel as a cook when the fishing season was over with.
I want to go on 2 things. We have a comment from I put it up and then I took it back down real quick because it's kind of long, but I want people to be able to read it, but I want to go through it. Nisi, she said it's going back to talking about the Confederate Army, and she said that they were there by force, mostly as at the start of the war. As soon as opportunity arose, they switched sides, as did many whites. Now, and then it goes on to talk about, how they got there, making a point about slavery, so on. You can see that up here. I wanted to know how you actually felt about her particular comment, because I try not to, I guess, assume that all of that happened. And the reason why I'm like that is because I feel like just like we have minds now, we had minds then. And we were able to make our own decisions on doing things. Now, I am not by any way suggesting that Black people were comfortable with being enslaved. I am not suggesting that. But in the same instance, if there was a Black person, if we believe that there were some Black people who were treated in a certain type of way, then they would be comfortable, because that way they were getting what they wanted anyway. Does that make sense what I'm trying to say? Am I saying that right, Brian, before we get
I'm not really following.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to try it again. Okay. So what I'm saying is, as an African American, being enslaved, you had, how they say it, the house and the
field.
The field. And the house was treated good. And if the house was treated good,
No,
then they're not.
the house was treated differently.
They were
Okay,
treated
well that I
because
understand.
remember, if you worked in the house, you were in the direct line of fire. There was nowhere for you to hide.
True. Okay,
Um,
so what I'm saying, but what I mean by that is they say that the house person, because that house person, they were treated differently, they still got a little bit more than the field. Am I correct?
Right.
That's the thought process. So
Right.
if that is the thought process of that, then why would they not possibly make that decision on moving towards helping the Confederate, because they were still able to get certain things. And this was that was the thought process that the others could not. And I feel like that's where her comment is going to a certain degree, that none of them really wanted that. But how can we say that when you had your house and then your field? Did that make sense now? Or am I still confusing everybody? I look like I'm confusing everybody.
No. If you were African American, whether in the house or the field, and you weren't happy, and the Union soldiers are nearby, you're gonna hightail it to get behind the lines of the Union soldiers.
Right.
That way, you're safe, you're free.
Right.
If my Confederate master takes me, because I don't have any choice, takes me into the Confederate Army, and I find a way, like one of my soldiers, Edward Clark, I'm going to find a way to get out. I'm going to find a way to get away from the Confederates. Now, Edward Clark claimed his master, he was taken into the Confederate Army. His master gave him a vacation, a Christmas vacation, 2 weeks, and he was supposed to go back. He said, I'm still on furlough. So he got away from him and joined the Union Army. Now, I'm suspect about the furlough.
Yeah, because that's not a word of that time.
Oh, this was a write-up in the newspaper in 1930.
Okay.
1932, he says when he got away from his master, he had to walk through icy waters to get to the other side. Now, I can believe that part of it. He also said he kept the Indians drunk in order to bypass them. So he joined the Union Army. Fought in one battle. When he got home and had an examination for his pension, they found out he had cancer. So
wow.
He died the year he had 1932. He died.
Wow. Sandra Abrams understands the question that I'm asking. I wish I could be clearer on what it is that I'm saying.
Well, I guess
Again,
to me, it's a really complex thing, because I would imagine if you were a single young male with no family and you had to accompany your enslaver and you're into the war. I'm thinking about what Cynthia's like, and Shelley said something very similar. We did what we had to do to survive. Thinking,
right.
well, okay, I will get as far as the Confederate line, but the first chance I get, I'm going to hop it over to the Union Army because they're the ones promising me freedom. Now, where things get tricky is if you had family back on the plantation, the farm, wherever it was you were enslaved, you left family back there, because
Not
that's
not
almost like,
necessarily.
no, but I'm saying if you had family left behind, if you were to decide to go over to the Union Army, you don't know what fate would befall the people that got left behind
Right.
with the enslaving family. So
Right.
that might have actually held you back because you weren't really sure what the enslaving family were going to do in retribution for you leaving.
And you're not going to go past that union line in case your owner is looking for you.
So this,
I don't know. I guess my whole situation is just like, I mean, I guess what we're saying is that those who we chose to go to the Union, but we didn't choose to go with our Confederate.
Right.
Which is I hear. Okay, and I understand that. But I guess my outside the box mind is saying, but what if there was some that actually did choose? Maybe that's the way I need to rephrase it.
Well, again, because there's the other option. We know in our own family, Dania, that a lot of our enslaved family members were related to the families who enslaved them. They were descendants of the same family that enslaved them. So if you have an enslaved half brother going into the Confederate Army with his white half brother, or even father, who's to say that it wasn't father and son? That's
right.
another conflicting set of emotions that you have to deal with. And the frustrating thing is, because illiteracy was so high amongst the enslaved people by design, we don't have their words on
right.
that.
Right.
That's the really, as a historian, that's the really frustrating thing, is not being, even though we have read first person accounts, there are not a whole lot of them.
Right.
And a bunch of them would be in their pension records, where they have spoken to the examiners of the pension board. There are a lot of stories in those pension records that tell how they got after they left their masters, how they got to the Union Army.
Okay. All right. I was just wondering, just the thoughts on that, because I'm always the one that it's very, very hard for me to assume. I don't want to use the word assume because of something my mother said, but in all seriousness, I don't like to say, oh no, they didn't want to do this, when in actuality, like Brian just said, it could have been father and son, brothers that loved each other, and he was like, hey, I'm going to be able to do that. It's just like, I don't want people to think that even during slavery times, everything was forced. There were people that actually the black and white people that actually fell in love with each other. There were, all of these things, there was different things that there were some black and white people that were just automatically attracted to each other. It was actual consent. Sometimes it just really wasn't great. But we all tend to harp on that one thing. Oh, they were raped back then, and that's it. They were made to do this back then, and that's it. That can't be possible because now you're not. So what makes you think that they didn't do it then? And I guess that's my overall thought process. So I always try to throw that in, but okay.
Although I guess I would flip that question on its head, and for those who did go away with their enslavers and stayed all the way up into Appomattox Courthouse, that would be an interesting question to find out why. If they'd had every opportunity to go over to the Union side, what stopped them from doing that?
Right.
So that would be a question for George Rawls. Why did he stay?
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. What made you stay there? What was going on with you? We have enslaved family members who were actually, to a certain degree, treated somewhat okay, depended upon, we have enslaved family members who enslavers actually taught their enslaved how to read, how to write, made sure they had,
trades.
Yeah, good money making trades, not just any trade, money making trades. So who's to say whether or not they they were like, you know what, I'm not gonna hand this up. I got it kind of good over here without it being too, who's to say? I just want to put that out there. And Sandra Abrams said sellouts. I'm not gonna call them sellouts. I'm just gonna think that they were thinking on what was best for them at that time period. Like, would it be good for them to leave?
Maybe it
If,
might be helpful to think
you
of
know,
it this way. Just like today, you have progressives, you have moderates, and you
right,
have conservatives.
right,
Maybe Mr. Rawls was more of that kind of conservative
conservative.
mindset, didn't want to buck against the kind of current trends, whereas other people made other decisions.
And he was a
Yeah.
single man at the time, so he didn't have a
Mhm.
spouse or children. So
Yeah.
Wow.
Just like
and
we are not a model.
and
Sorry, go ahead.
he may have been getting paid. I mean, he was a private in that army.
Okay.
So life for him was good.
Just like we are not a monolithic people today, we weren't a monolithic people back then, even in slavery.
Right. So I have one more. I have another question for you. You're writing a book about this, am I correct?
It's pretty much written. I'm waiting.
Okay, so
I'm waiting to hear from a publisher.
all right. Well, we hope it comes through. We do.
Yeah, so do I, because I've worked on that thing so long. And my historian friend keeps finding more Black people.
Is that Candace?
He sent me one last week.
Oh, okay. I thought it was Candace that did it.
No. Her thing is the Native Americans up where she lives.
Yeah, it is. It is. We'll have to try to get her one day, possibly, maybe.
So I guess in the closing minutes of the show, one of the things that I'm interested in is the kind that dynamic in places like Washington and Oregon. So as more African Americans were moving into this region, were they establishing like Black towns, or were they just kind of living right alongside everyone else?
They were living alongside everyone else.
That's awesome.
I don't think I've heard of any Black towns out here. That's more or less for the South.
Wow.
But they were living next door to each other. In Seattle, I live in the Central District, and I've been there for the last 50 years. And it's gone from being Jewish to African American, and now it's being gentrified because of all the construction that they're doing.
And I guess if someone were to find out, to take me up on my suggestion, and they can't find their family or 3 times gray uncles who may have disappeared around this time period, and find them in places like Washington and Oregon, were there I know that those places had their own newspapers. Were there any African American newspapers?
Yes, the Seattle Republican newspaper was a Black newspaper.
Okay, and has that been digitized? Is there a place that people can get copies of that?
Yeah, you can do the Library of Congress chronicling America.
Okay.
Excellent.
The Washington State Digital Archives might have something, and that's for the entire state.
Excellent. And probably the last question is, you're speaking about barbershops and really, professions that require property. So I'm assuming a percentage, not all of them, but a percentage would have been property owners. How easy is it to get a hold of land records for the Northwest?
I've had a hard time because you got to go downtown.
Ah, okay.
And then there's only about 3 or 4 microfilm readers to go through the microfilm. So I haven't bothered too much. Was looking to see who owned land. There's a place out in Bellevue that you can have them look up if you know the address, and the background will be on the sheet of paper that they find. Will tell you if they own the property or not. Puget Sound Archives.
Thank you
Excellent.
so much.
Well, thank you so much for the hour and dropping your knowledge and that little segue into some Civil War history. Um, and again, thank you everyone at home who spent the last hour with us.
As always, this has been a knowledge dropping show, and we really appreciate you guys being a part of it. Thank you for our over 6,500 likes as well. That is just
Wow.
yeah, we are really growing, and I'm thankful for it. Cynthia, thank you again. Stay on the line, and we just want to wish everybody a great Sunday.
Indeed. Stay safe, be happy, and to see you next week at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time.
Yes. Bye, guys. Stay on the line, please, Cynthia.
Okay.